According to MediaOcean's recent survey of 1,200 executive level marketers, there are three common ways marketers use artificial intelligence today. Number one, data analysis, 45% of marketers. Number two, market research, 40% of marketers. And number three, copywriting, 20% of marketers. That was surprising to me. I thought copywriting would be first, but I don't think any of the top three are a surprise. And there's a deeper message here. The real problem is making a connection from your data to your research so your copywriting authentically reflects your brand voice. Using AI tools without context creates generic sounding content, and your brand voice gets lost in the noise. How can you encode your authentic voice into AI systems? I'm Benjamin Shapiro, and joining me today is Nataly Kelly, the CMO of Zappy and the co author of Brand Global Adapt Local. And today, Nataly is going to explain how marketers can effectively encode their brand voice using AI tools. Nataly, welcome to the Martech podcast.
Thank you, Ben. Wonderful to be
Very
here.
excited to have you. Welcome back, I should say. You've been here once before.
Yes, it's lovely to be back. I always enjoy speaking with you.
I'm excited to have you here, and we've got lots to talk about and lots to celebrate. First off, you wrote your fourth book, Brand Global Adapt Local.
Yes, well, I have to say, Catherine Melchiorre, who was a guest of yours previously, is the lead author on this book. So I didn't write it alone. And it is much more fun to write a book with another person. So I really enjoyed the process this time.
Well, congratulations on writing the fourth book. And, I think of you as one of the best writers in marketing. You've been featured in Forbes, I think a Harvard Business Review, you're a published author, and somehow you're also able to be a CMO at a fast growing company. You clearly have a lot on your plate. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your writing strategy and your philosophy, because I think it's useful for marketers. Let's talk a little bit about brand voice and what's your philosophy and what's the purpose of cultivating a great brand voice?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for saying that. I don't view myself as one of the greatest writers in marketing at all. I feel like I'm struggling and, just trying to keep up like everybody else and trying to share what I learn. I think that AI has helped us a ton in being able to accelerate certain processes with writing. But this whole topic of brand voice is very near and dear to my heart because I do think it's important that whatever we put out there is authentic and reflects who we are, whether it's for our personal brand or in the case of Zappy, the brand that I am overseeing, stewarding, et cetera, growing as a CMO. So that is an important topic. And I believe those stats that you shared at the beginning are very intertwined in all of this, because if you're not able to do great research, get that feedback, analyze the data, understand what it means, you can't include that in your writing and you can't message it in a way that is compliant with your brand voice style, style guidelines and all of that. So it is a challenge to weave all these things together. Now that we have all these new tools at our disposal, it's a constant challenge for marketers to figure out how exactly to do that.
It seems like there's an order of operations here, or there's a foundation that needs to be followed. And I think that most marketers or most people in general, most business professionals think of writing being a creative pursuit. You either have the inherent talent or you don't. And I think that understanding the purpose of a brand voice and then creating your tone and style guide so it can influence what you're actually writing is an important process to follow. So when you think about building a brand voice or defining it, what is your process or what's the exercise that you go through to sort of get that higher level order so it can cascade down into what's actually getting onto the page?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I think it's different if you're talking about a brand that you're creating a marketing program for, or building a brand voice as a marketer, or if it's your personal brand. I can talk a little bit about each because I think there's a lot of common ground, and it might be easier to think about your personal brand first because that's where things start, right? That's where ideas come from, and I don't believe there is anyone who can't be a good writer with the right tools, with the right editing, with the right process. because it's really about having great ideas and expressing those ideas in a way that resonates with a specific audience that might want to hear what you have to say. So when I think about creating that brand voice, part of it is simply who you are and boiling down to the essence of what you stand for and what your mission is and what your values are. So that's as true for your personal brand as it is for an actual business brand. So what I mean by that is if you already have encoded or documented a lot of, your corporate values, the things that you care about, your mission, what you stand for, it makes it so much easier to then develop those brand voice guidelines and develop everything that stems from that. Now, if you're a writer or you want to be a writer and you're trying to develop this for yourself, you might need feedback because you might not know what makes you different and what your own, what's coming across in your style. I didn't know this when I began writing until an editor who I worked with very closely when I was at a market research firm told me, Nataly, your style is very punchy. You write with really short sentences, really clear, really a lot of like almost percussive writing, like attack, attack,
Mhm.
attack. And I didn't realize that I was doing that. I don't speak that way necessarily, but when I write, that is how I think and that's how it comes across. And because I was writing for market research and business audiences, it wasn't really appropriate for me to write that way. That was more like copywriting style. And so I had to actually change the way I wrote, but that was like my natural tone of voice, my natural brand voice. And that still is my personal brand. So if you ever see any writing from me that has like short words that almost are like poetry.
3 to 5 word sentences. You're basically writing long haikus,
Yes, I do. I do that all the time.
which
And it's funny because people are like, "Oh, that's AI generated." And I'm like, "That's not AI generated at all. That's my actual style." And maybe nobody likes that but me, but that's me. So,
I like it.
I like it too because it's different and that's how I think and it's a reflection of who I am. So if people don't like it, maybe they don't like me and the way I think. I don't, So, but that is how you build an identity and how you let that come across in your messaging. And the reason I mention it here is because the more care you take in figuring out what makes you different and what those values are, the easier it is to encode them, the easier it is to train others to do it, including AI tools, agents, etc., and other writers. And that's how you scale that brand voice. And so when I looked at my own values, one of the reasons I like that short, punchy, accessible language is because it's easy to understand and people can parse it quickly. It's efficient, it's democratizing in a way. And so I like that because that's the way I like to come across. That's the way I want ideas to be shared. So it really does tie to my own values and my personal brand. So when I'm working with a company like Zappy, very different brand. It's punchy and bold and in your face, a little cowboy. It's like very, very bold. And that's a brand, I didn't create that. I came here, and that was a brand that already existed that had been built up over many years. And that relates back to the essence of the values of the founders. And that all comes across in how a company expresses itself in every way, including tone of voice. So I think the clearer you are about getting that and documenting it and putting it into specifics of why do we write this way? Why do we use this word versus that word? Why did the founder dislike that certain word? The more you can pull that out, the more you can scale it and understand the meaning behind it. And that's really important when you're dealing with AI tools because you're not going to be able to scale it, leverage it, train a tool to do that consistently unless you've taken the time to really think through that.
All right. So you're starting either whether it's a personal brand or whether it is your company brand by identifying your mission, your values, and you're using that to basically have a top down influence on everything you're doing. After you get past this, all right, here's our identity, here's our philosophy, here's our brand voice and the rationale behind it. Zappy's brand being a little bit corporate punk rock, right? A little
Mhm.
bit sort of I don't want to say counterculture, but bright and vibrant, but a little different and a little
We
challenging,
call it
right?
Rebel Magician. It's the Rebel Magician play. There's like a hybrid Rebel Magician persona that we exude.
Rebel
Yeah,
magician. There we go.
yeah.
Perfectly describes it.
Mhm.
I went punk rock, but we're in the same ballpark.
Yeah,
The,
definitely.
then you have to be able to document that in some sort of a tone or a style guide, right? Just giving an AI prompt saying, hey, my brand is about rebel magician doesn't feel like it's specific enough to get this word versus that word. So how do you think about going down from this ethos of who we are into something that defines what the tone and style should be?
Yes, so that is the next layer down, and that's where you have to start to provide examples of how that shows up. And what's interesting is you can train AI tools and humans, just like when you're writing a style guide, you show examples of good and bad, like do this, not that, and showing this is on brand, this is not. And here's why. The reason that this is not part of our brand voice is because we don't use these types of terms because we think that's a little too squishy and soft. We like to use bold language in the case of Zappy's brand. My version of that for my own personal writing style might be I try not to use words that have too many syllables because I want it to be super accessible for people. Um, I try not to use things that are too flamboyant, because I just don't want it to be alienating or, not as accessible. But I think for Zappy, we would use words that are a little more like bang, boom, bombastic, because
Yeah.
that is our brand. So
Mhm.
understanding and identifying that is really important, but providing those specifics, especially if there are key terms, key ways that you express things. I have certain turns of phrase that I use a lot in my own language and my own writing that I, train AI tools to remember. These are some little turns of phrases that I like, that I use all the time in my daily, the way I speak, and that I use in my writing. And for Zappy, we do this as well because there are lots of little plays on words. Like I usually, everywhere I go, when I'm speaking on behalf of Zappy, I say, "Thank you for having me. I'm Zappy to be here today." And it always makes people smile. And people think it's a little
It's good.
little cute and a little fun and a little playful. And so we use those types of little plays on words. And so we want to get that little, I'm a little bit rebellious. I'm going to play with my brand a little. Like I'm cool with that. That's kind of how the Zappy brand shows up. And so it's important to be intentional and actually specify when you're training AI agents or tools, or you have a Claude project or whatever you're doing, to really feed that and to be specific to say, I'm adding this to my project instructions. Like, remember to do this. Here's this list of do's and don'ts. And what I also like to do with, tools like Claude is when I see things that are great examples that are resonating really well and that I feel really are like great examples of brand identity, I'll feed that in and say, analyze this, identify any patterns that you think, that are different or unique about the writing style. And it will produce things that I didn't even realize were part of the brand voice. It does that for me. I always, whenever I write anything, feed it into one of these tools. I like to get the the patterns. And so I might say, analyze these 4 pieces of writing. What are the common trends? What's that mean for the style? And that way I can use that for the next prompting, to leverage it and make it consistent. And so you can do that no matter if you're doing it for your corporate brand or your personal brand. It works very well, but you have to want to do that grunt work up front to get that output later. And
Yeah.
it's not fun for people because people want instant results, but I think it's so important to have that patience to retrain, constantly iterate. That's how you get to an elevated brand voice, is by doing that consistently.
Yeah, I went through this process. I had a ghostwriter for years writing LinkedIn posts about all the episodes we were doing for the Martech podcast. And eventually we just didn't feel like it was really making that big of an impact on business. So I just stopped posting on LinkedIn for 6 months until I figured out the strategy. And the realization was I need to actually write first.
Mhm.
And I started writing authentic posts that were from me, from the heart. I actually had them handwritten, and then I would take a picture of them and have GPT transcribe it and hopefully fix some grammar and then publish them. And those posts perform way better than anything that I had been doing with the ghostwriter because they were more relevant and specific to me. Then from those posts, I was able to take it, feed it back to GPT and be like, okay, tell me who I am as a writer. Give me my style guide. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and there's this constant refinement process. But as you're going through, having that tone and style guide and sort of having the sort of, I guess, the general structure for what your tone is absolutely mission critical for creating AI generated content.
Mhm.
Which begs the question, should we be making AI generated content? What role does artificial intelligence have in your writing? Are you giving a topic and have AI writing it and you're the editor? Are you writing and then having AI the editor? Tell me about your process.
Mhm. So I've experimented with everything. And it's interesting because, well, I say everything, but I always come up with more ideas and things I can experiment with. So not everything yet, but I've done a ton of experimentation and I've learned so much about what does and doesn't work. What doesn't work for me is to have something written completely from scratch in my voice without any training. In fact, I'll give you a quick anecdote. So I write for many outlets, and they have human editors who check things and make sure that it's never been published anywhere else and all of this. So I spent a lot of time writing an article, all original ideas, concepts I created, things that don't exist anywhere else that were unique to me, including a framework that I came up with. I was proud of this. But there was one section of the article that I was like, this isn't as robust as I want it to be. So I took it from my Google Doc where I was drafting and I put it in ChatGPT and I said, help me rewrite this section, just this section here, but make sure that the flow is in line with everything else that I've written. So it rewrote just those couple of paragraphs. And I was really happy with the output. And I said, oh, this sounds like in my voice. It sounds good, all this. So we sent it over to the editor and
Oh,
they flagged it. They said they had run it through a AI detection tool and a plagiarism tool, and it had come back with some sentences that were almost directly lifted from a blog somewhere that ChatGPT had leveraged and never specified that it was citing it. So as a result, that editor was like, this is plagiarism. And I literally only used it for a couple paragraphs to rewrite. And I thought, well, this is just editing. It's not even writing, and
right.
it's like 80, 90, 95% of the content was written by me, my ideas and everything. But I got in trouble for that little tiny bit. So it just goes to show you have to be super careful whenever you're asking it to do these things without proper training. Because in that instance, I hadn't provided any training materials. I hadn't done anything other than just drop it in there, ask it to do something simplistic. I learned my lesson. I was horrified because this also was visible to my team members and like the editors emailing them saying I plagiarized. I'm like, I swear I didn't,
I didn't mean
I
to.
didn't even know that like ChatGPT could do that, like would lift things like a whole sentence. So you do have to be super careful. Now that was a while back. It might not be as bad, but today, but I also had not trained it to write things in my style and not, do those things. And so now my prompt instructions and my project instructions are much more explicit, but I do use these tools very differently than I did a year ago because I've learned a ton. That's like one of many, many things I've learned. But I love what I love using it for is my writing process is labor intensive because I write really long. Nobody wants to read all my thoughts, and I write really long. So in many cases, like, you mentioned that haiku style. I could do that for days. Like I could just keep going and going. But
Short sentence after short sentence.
right. But what I have to do is make it digestible for the average reader because they don't want to hear me talk forever. So I have used different tools to synthesize and cut or dissect or carve up or reduce and things like that. Whereas a lot of people out here, are like, oh, write 20 blog posts on whatever topic and I'll publish them on my blog. Like they use it to kind of increase the amount of content. I'm using it to kind of synthesize and decrease and improve and condense down to less quantity, but more quality that's aligned with my brand voice. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I found really useful is using AI to evaluate your content based on your specific purpose.
Yes.
So I'll go into a writing session saying, I am writing this as a LinkedIn post that is specifically targeted towards mid market CMOs so they understand that I Hear Everything is a media production company. And here are the problems I'm trying to address. Then I'm using a tool called Whisper. I think it's Super Whisper or Whisper Flow. There's two different ones. I forgot which one I downloaded, but basically you press the function button and then you just talk.
Yes.
So I'm not actually writing, but I'm sitting here being like, hey, 95% of marketers are, marketing towards the wrong profiles, and here's why, and here's how you do it. Go through the whole thing and then getting a draft and then saying, okay, now evaluate this on a scale of 1 to 100 based on how effective it would be for my intended goal.
Yes.
And what the process is after I've sort of spoken out what I want to say and have it reformatted is then I can go back and have a feedback loop.
Yes.
And it's essentially synthetic data, right? It's
Mhm.
saying, hey, this is an 85 out of 100. And now I have a conversation with my AI that is, what's missing? How can I shorten this? What's going to be more effective? Which passages are confusing? And I'm getting real-time feedback, albeit not from a human, but it's still a data source where I can think through whether this is right or wrong and using my best judgment for what I do want to change and what I don't.
Yes. Yes, I love that, and in fact, that's a best practice, and I will say, this comes from my background as a translator and interpreter, and my first job out of college was I was a Spanish translator and interpreter, and one of the things I learned is that it's much, much faster to speak than it is to write. And so, a hack back in the days when translators used to have transcription machines in their homes is that they would speak the translations while they were reading out loud because it was much faster than typing because you can just generate content much faster that way. So if they had like to translate a book really quickly over a weekend and the publisher is like on deadline, they would use this as a hack. So ever since I knew that, since 1996, I have always used transcription. I used to pay humans to transcribe interviews and things like that as a way to capture content and then reformat it and then publish it as blog posts in the early days of SEO to grow organic traffic and and I still do that now. Sometimes I leave myself a voice memo when I'm driving or whatever, and I get that transcript, pop it into your favorite AI tool, and then turn that into something. I can turn it into a listicle, or I can turn it into a LinkedIn post, or I could turn it into a blog post, or I can turn it into a newsletter idea. There's so many ways that you can capture your thoughts now and capture them at scale, but then repurpose them. So I have a whole like huge Trello board of like content ideas I've just captured that I want to hold on to for the future. But I love that process because speech is very natural. And they always say, write how you speak. Yes and no, because like I ramble.
I would have really long blog posts. I
Me
tend
too.
to be very
I'm
long-winded.
obviously rambling. But so you don't want that. But you do want it to be colloquial, accessible, friendly language. And so I do love taking that transcript, turning it into something that's highly readable and natural and in your brand voice. There's no better way than like your thoughts as they're emerging and coming out of your mouth. Like that is authentic.
Yeah.
So
So talk to me about your toolkit. Obviously, I'm sure it's evolved over the last year. I'm sure it's regularly evolving. You mentioned before that you've got a specific prompt for hooks. What does your writing kit look like?
I mean, for writing, I'm really only using Claude and ChatGPT, and primarily Claude is my favorite for writing. But I do a lot with projects. So if I'm writing a LinkedIn post, I might ask if I can't think of a really good hook that I like myself, I might, for inspiration, go to my hook architect project, which I have trained based on hooks that perform well. I've gone back and done analysis on impressions and engagement on my past posts, and also looked at what other people are doing and what their hooks are like. I don't always copy or leverage exactly the formula because some of them are just not me. Like some of them are very clickbaity and just I don't really love the format of them, but things that are me, I will definitely borrow. There's formulas and hooks you can leverage. So I feed those into my hook architect project in Claude so that I have kind of a baseline to constantly make sure that if I'm stuck, I can go there and say, oh, here's the hook I've written, make it better, use the formulas that you've learned to make this one better. And it will usually give me like 3 or 4 examples, and that I can choose the best one or I can tailor it. I will say there's times when it comes up with a really good one that I'm like, oh, that's great. And that sounds like me. Other times I'm like, none of these are really good. So I have to keep going and reiterate, regenerate until I get to where I like one. And what's funny is when you think about all of the things I just said, it's like you could write a hook in like less than a minute. Like, why go to all that trouble? you know?
You can write a hook in less than a minute. It takes me forever.
But like you could, but it has to be good. And like you want it to lead in and be deserving of the post, right? So there's an art and science to that, but that's just one little thing. So I do have separate Claude projects for each type of content where I want refinement, where I want help, where I want to curate and distill down. And I have lots of different projects that I'm experimenting with, and I take pieces out of them, and I'm like, come up with a really great data point for this, or, you know, take this data point and do some analysis, or, I have all kinds of different projects based on what my goal is.
Yeah, it's interesting that you have content or that you have projects that are based on the format of writing, a hooks project, right? Essentially a editing project, as
Mhm.
opposed to, I think, at least maybe I assume most other people, I have a LinkedIn project,
Mhm.
and I have a YouTube copywriting project. I have,
Yes.
blog post projects, and I'm thinking more of the output as opposed to the 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 process of writing. It seems like you've structured it to go from project to project for different stages in the writing process as opposed to different outputs.
Well, I have a little bit of a mix. So I have in my content calendar for LinkedIn, I have specific things that I want to post about regularly on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays. Like I have lined up different types of posts for different segments of my audience, because some are generalist and some are more for marketers and some are more for global business people. And I also have 2 LinkedIn newsletters. So I have separate projects for each LinkedIn newsletter as well. And what I've done for my LinkedIn newsletters is I've trained Claude with a project. This is the format. This is what I use every time. And so I have basically a formula that I use where I can drop in the topic, I can drop in the inputs. It will spit out the newsletter, but I still have to go in and do quite a bit of editing. So it will help me with kind of like what an intern would do if I said, "Okay, get it like 60% of the way there." And that Claude project for each LinkedIn newsletter has a different format and different audience. So I've trained that within that project, within the project knowledge, I've uploaded the top performing newsletters, and I've, indicated like analyze the pattern, and, basically developed a template, then added the template to the project knowledge, then leverage that template the next time I have one. Now I've got it down to where I can write a newsletter, it'll generate a full newsletter in 10 minutes and it'll be in my voice. But would I be happy enough to publish it without a lot of editing? If I'm in a real hurry, maybe, but I don't feel happy if I don't edit it quite to make it in my voice. So, yeah, I do have different things for different audiences, different purposes. It's a mix. I won't say it's really clear cut.
Yeah, I think the distinction is it's in your voice,
Yes.
but it's not by you. And that really is where, again, it's human in the loop, right? AI is not a replacement, it's a tool. And I think the more that us marketers understand how to use it, the more we'll understand where to interject ourselves to make sure that we are keeping that human connection that makes our content actually resonate with other people. All right, Natalie, I want to move on to our lightning round where I'm going to ask you a couple of marketing related questions specific to building your brand voice. Are you ready?
I hope so. Let's try.
All right. You just wrote your fourth book, Brand Global, Adapt Local. Give us the rationale for writing this book.
This book is to help people who are in charge of global brands really understand how to show up locally, but it's also informed by the perspective of people who have gone abroad, lived in other countries, know what it's like to be on the ground in those markets, building brands in those local markets, which is very different from being in a headquarter location distant from local markets, and how that lived experience really helps build local brands that are part of a bigger global brand.
So it seems like there is a positioning of understanding local operations, but having a greater context of, the global business. Why now?
Well, I think it's never been more important than today because brands now are more globally connected than ever before. The second you have a website, you're global, or at least people can go and learn about your brand. There are tools now where people can self-serve and translate your content into other language, into their native language. And so brands are in some ways in less control than ever before because they can't just say, "Oh, I'm only going to launch this for this one market." Actually, kind of the moment you put it on TikTok or the moment you put it on Instagram, people can find it from anywhere. So now is more important for local and global to be connected because customers in local markets are more globally connected than ever before. So therefore, brands need to be as well.
All right. You've written your fourth book, but this is the first one you've ever written with a co author. Tell me about how writing with a co author is different than a solo project.
Yes. Well, I have to say it's so much fun to work with a co-author. Working with Catherine has been a delight. She's the lead of it. I contributed the chapters on B2B and tech and help with the, front matter, back matter, editing, etc. We definitely collaborated throughout the process, but it's just so much fun. And I also have to say, speaking of brand voice, writing style, other stuff we've been talking about, Catherine has a beautiful writing style that is very different from mine. And her style really sings off the page. She's very descriptive with her language. She could be a fiction writer. I'm, business, boring business writer. Her writing is actually, it pops and it's vivid and it's fun. She's a B2C marketer. So, she's got that connection to the consumer that is, it just shines in her writing. So I love it. In fact, it was challenging for me because I was like, I have to write about B2B and websites and globalization technology. How am I going to make that sexy, and fun? So it was fun to write this with her because it really helped me up level in different ways that I hadn't experienced as a writer before.
I wouldn't call your writing style boring in any sense of the word, but I am curious to hear about the, meshing those two tones. The book has to be consistent and sound like it's written by the same voice throughout. You have two differentiating tones. How do you blend the two?
I tried to adapt as much as I could because the majority of the book was Catherine's concepts, her ideas, and came mostly from her. So when you're in that position, it's kind of like, okay, I'm not going to just introduce my different writing style. I'm going to try to flex more. So I did try to make mine more kind of first person narrative. She leaned into a lot of her experiences in Japan and France. I tried to lean more into my personal, first person anecdotes, launching the HubSpot office in Japan, things like that, that would be compelling but fitting and make the voice more similar to her writing style. Fortunately, because I write for a lot of different outlets, I've had to adapt my style to each of those because editors have their preferences. So I'm familiar with how to do that. But I did definitely flex in that direction. And I think it's a better book because it's not my boring writing.
You're too critical, but I want to move on to your day job. Give me one word that describes the status of market research today.
Oh, disruption worthy.
Just there's a hyphen in there. We're going to call it one word, disruption worthy. All right, tell me why.
So, market research, consumer research is still done in very outdated ways. There are newer, better ways to capture consumer feedback and store it and treat it in a more agile, continuous fashion than a lot of companies do. A lot of companies will go do a consumer survey and get the feedback, and then they'll make a decision. And then it takes a long time to bring that feedback to life in the form of a product that appears on a shelf or packaging or design or an advertising campaign. A lot of these, like Super Bowl campaigns, for example, they're designed many, many months before. And by the time the consumer has given that feedback and it's actioned, the consumer may have moved on to the next thing. So I think the process is very slow, and the way it's done in a lot of companies is still very old school. And what I love about Zappy and the platform that we offer is that it makes it connected and continuous. So the consumer feedback is in the loop throughout. And you don't just have to do a one and done throwaway research. The feedback remains in there, the consumer data remains in there. And what you were talking about at the very beginning about these areas of AI use, the top ones are market research and data analysis. And that's exactly what we do in our platform. And that's exactly where we've implemented AI tools first, because that is time consuming, but it can be sped up and it can be more continuous and agile with the use of AI, with the use of more modern technology, which we've been using for many years. So I'm a huge fan of the work that we're doing, and I do believe it's disrupting a market that is worthy of disrupting.
Disruption worthy, the
Yep.
one word answer.
Yes.
All right, moving on. Last question. Buy or sell? Are you buying or selling that all writers should be using artificial intelligence for every piece of copy they create?
Oh, I'm gonna have to say sell. I'm not gonna buy that.
Wow.
I'm not gonna buy that idea. The reason is every piece of copy, I can't subscribe to that. I write stuff and I publish it without AI. And I always will. There will always be times when I just want to write something quickly and I think it's good and I'm going to publish it, especially for social media content. So I do believe every writer should use AI. I don't believe they should use it for every piece of copy that they write.
God, I think I use AI for everything now. And it's not necessarily just that AI is writing. It's my evaluation tool. It's my editor. It's my sanity check. It's making sure that everything is in my tone of voice. I'm not always 100% consistent, but I assume that artificial intelligence is, if I give it the right rules. I'm in the buy camp.
Ah,
I'm surprised you're in the sell.
can I give you one consideration that will
By
maybe
all means.
move you to the sell camp? So, if you're engaging with someone on social media, do you consider it copy if you are replying to a comment, engaging? Because I would consider that copy that I'm writing because it's published, it's out there, other people are seeing it, my audience sees it, it gets impressions. But I wouldn't think to use an AI tool for that because I want it to be authentic and me and my voice to shine. So that's where I think, I'm not going to use AI for everything. Sometimes I will actually, if I have a thoughtful comment or my comment might be a little snippy, if somebody's hating on, my post, I sometimes will use AI to tone myself down. Like, hey, make this sound a little less snarky. Natalie is coming across a little snarky today, but I don't use it for every piece of copy. That's for sure.
You're right. I don't use AI for my replies. Now that I think of it, I probably should. I feel like most of my replies are trying to be funny, and people are like, this guy's a clown. But hopefully, the underlying posts are pretty good.
Good answer.
All right. On that note, Natalie, it was wonderful to have you back on the Martech podcast. Congratulations on finishing your fourth book, for your success at Zappy, and of course for being one of my favorite business writers.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Wonderful.
All right, that wraps up this episode of the Martech podcast. Thanks to Natalie Kelly, the CMO of Zappy and the author of Brand Global Adapt Local. If you'd like to contact Natalie, you can find a link to her LinkedIn profile in our show notes or on martechpod.com, or you can visit her company's website, which is zappy.io. If you haven't subscribed yet and you want a daily stream of marketing and technology knowledge in your podcast feed, hit the subscribe button in your podcast app or find us on YouTube, and we'll be back in your feed next week. All right, that's it for today. But until next time, my advice is to just focus on keeping your customers happy.